I am one of the participants. I'm not even going to call myself the host because that's Austin. Austin hosts these shows. I'm Josh Hudson, one of our consensus rankers here at Club Fantasy. And that's what this show is. We are focusing on our wide receiver rankings. If you've missed the first two special edition episodes, we covered our quarterback, tight end, and running back rankings. So the way that I like to look at it, or as most zero RB drafters like to look at it, we'll save the best for last. So with me on the stream today, Ryan Weisse, Austin Amandolia, as I mentioned, hosting, and Joel Wirth, three others of our consensus rankers. Steve's on vacation, and Chris has a day job that he can't do this kind of stuff. So that being said, let's get into it.
What's going on, everybody? We got there. Me and I guess Ryan or Josh just trying to unmute myself, and we kept kind of going back and forth there for a minute.
Too many hosts.
I'm very excited. Too many hosts.
Cooks in
we
the
all
kitchen.
have admin privileges. We should probably fix that next time. I'm so excited tonight. We are talking wide receiver rankings, and I first off just wanted to say thank you to Josh and Ryan for letting me run with this wild idea to have these special shows to talk through our rankings. I got very hype about it when I saw how bonkers some of our rankings were, and also just how naturally some of the questions and conversations came to mind. And I've really enjoyed it, getting to spend the time with all of you, and hope that it's helped folks as they are in the heart of draft season. Before I go any further, I want to introduce again all of our rankers. We have myself at Austin_FFL on Instagram and Twitter. To my left is Josh Hudson at the One Hudsonian, the founder of Club Fantasy. Beneath me is Ryan Weisse at the Fantasy 5. And then we got Joel Wirth at the Joel Wirth. So excited for this. Just a quick reminder of our process on how we do rankings. Every Friday, our rankings get updated on our website, clubfantasyffl.com. Today, we did a little bit of an early update for our wide receiver rankings so that as we're talking through this, you can go to our website and see our rankings in real time. And we've already, as Josh mentioned, we've already talked quarterbacks and tight ends. That was our first episode, and we did running backs last week. We saved wide receivers for this week because, in Josh's words, we're keeping the best for last. In my words, there's like 50 receivers I love. And so there is some advice to have here, but also like you could probably have just done dart throws your entire draft up until this point on receivers and done just fine, except for maybe one or two players that we'll get to. Before we get into our consensus rankings, I do want to touch on a little bit of news as it pertains to some less than notable receivers around the NFL. And we're going to start because this week teams had to cut down their rosters to the 53-man roster, and therefore a lot of receivers got cut or moved to other teams. Some were traded. And the first one we're going to talk about, I think is probably Josh's favorite receiver, is Jalen Rager, who has been traded to Minnesota. So, Josh, how does it feel to be free of Jalen Rager?
There's one of my favorite scenes from the first season of Friends when Chandler can't figure out how to break up with Janice, and then Phoebe just like swoops in at the last minute and ends things. And then the tag of the episode is Chandler just running outside of Central Perk screaming, "I'm free! I'm free!" That's basically how I feel right now. I don't have to deal with this anymore. We've moved on. It was pretty apparent we moved on when we brought in A.J. Brown and we drafted Devonta Smith. And we obviously know who those guys are right now, which kind of left Rager as the odd man out. So, hey, you know what? Go get a fresh start behind the guy that you've been inevitably compared to since you've been drafted. Let's see how that works on your psyche. I don't know. I'm wishing him the best, but to me, this really doesn't hurt any of the Minnesota wide receivers, this feels like a special teams move because they did move on from Amir Marset, something or another. Smith, I think was his last name. Smith Marset. There you go. So he'll probably end up doing a lot of like kick punt returns for them, which is fine because he is very talented at that. So, but they have a really good wide receivers coach in Minnesota, and that's something that Philadelphia has been dog shit with, is developing wide receivers. So good on Rager. I'm sorry things didn't work out, because believe me when I tell you, I was pulling for you.
Yeah, I mean, you had to pull for him after.
No. I was really pulling for him. He was like my wide receiver 2 in that class. Like, oof. Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't have to tell people those things.
Hey, all right.
Save that for the accountability show at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Oh, trust me, I got lit up on the accountability show that year. Trust me.
I bet. Yeah, I agree. I don't think this has many implications on redraft leagues. I think you probably weren't drafting Jalen Rager to begin with, and you still probably aren't drafting Jalen Rager. Like KJ Osborne is still the kind of late round dart throw receiver in the Minnesota Vikings offense. Maybe Rager gets thrown in every now and then as wide receiver 3. Maybe he'll come in 4 receiver sets. So who knows? Maybe by week 5, we look at him as a potential DFS dart throw value pick. But
he almost has to come in 4 wide receiver sets, though, with them letting Marset Smith go and then BC Johnson's on the IR. So
yeah. Unless you're putting Irv Smith doing 4 out and have Irv Smith in the slot. But who knows? We'll see. We'll see if it turns into anything, but most likely it won't. Another receiver who's probably not going to turn into much, but we have to talk about it because I want to hear Joel's opinions, is Laviska Shenault got traded to the Carolina Panthers. And my first thing is, Carolina, what are you doing trading for Laviska Shenault from an NFL perspective? Like, you need draft picks, and you're just like, oh yeah, Shenault, that's a good use of draft capital, whatever. But Joel, for fantasy purposes, how do you feel about this trade for Laviska Shenault?
So Shenault has no value, whatever. The question's going around now is
moving on.
How does this affect Robbie Anderson? Is this the end of the line for Terrace Marshall? Is he going to back up Christian McCaffrey? No. They traded a 7th round pick next year and a 6th round pick in 24 to get him. That is nothing. That's 0 draft capital. So that means, I mean, we've known for a couple of weeks that they had him on the market in Jacksonville. So that means the best offer that they got was a 7th rounder. He wasn't making the team. He was not making that team. A team that last year gave snaps to Jamal Agnew, Laquan Treadwell, Tavon Austin, who apparently is a better version of Laviska Shenault, and that's a pretty low bar to clear. So, yeah, I don't think it affects any of those guys in any way. Fun fact, if you go back to the 2020 draft, he was taken immediately after Jonathan Taylor and 1 spot in front of Cole Kmet. So just a wasted draft pick. Obviously, Carolina.
I love how we found a way to work Cole Kmet into the wide receiver ranking show. Thank you for
I
that.
thought you'd like that. So, yeah, they're just trying to maybe relive some draft capital that doesn't exist at the cost of basically 2 7th rounders. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect anyone. He's a bench stash for them. He's fantasy irrelevant.
The one thing I'll throw out, I covered the Panthers for their training camp for football guys. The coaching staff is not happy with Marshall right now, that Marshall is not playing through injury and seems to find ways to be off the field rather than on the field. While I agree with Joel, I don't think this necessarily affects Terrace Marshall. I wasn't a big Terrace Marshall guy to begin with. I think this was a light a fire move. Like, if you're not motivated by the fact that we're bringing someone in to take your job, you're done. Not that he wouldn't have been done in Carolina after this year anyway, but it's not a great move. So.
If they don't like Terrace Marshall, that's just proof of how bad a coaching staff they have.
They do not like Terrace Marshall, and they are a bad coaching staff.
Yes, agreed. Great. Okay, I don't have much more on Laviska Shenault. I think I traded him away earlier this year, or I think I have him in a dynasty league, and I'm like, please, somebody take him off my roster. Please.
Yeah, I did the same thing with Jalen Rager.
Put him on the trading block after I have him in 2 leagues, and I was like,
see, I went.
Somebody come
Everybody cut Rager this preseason like very early, so I went and signed him everywhere, just hoping he would end up on a team that needed wide receiver, and clearly that's not happening now. So he'll find his way to the waivers again soon.
Yeah, it's a tough life for some of these guys.
It is.
The last one that came out that was mildly notable was Tyler Johnson cut by Tampa Bay and was then claimed off the waivers by the Houston Texans. So I think this is notable on two accounts. First off, the fact that he was cut by Tampa Bay. They have some receiver injuries in that offense right now.
So deep too, though.
They must feel comfortable that they have what they need there. So to me, this makes me feel a bit better about Chris Godwin coming back. It makes me feel better about Russell Gage. He's kind of been questionable and on and off the injury reports. So I think this is a positive sign for the Tampa Bay receiver room that's still there. And then as far as him moving to Houston goes, I do actually like Tyler Johnson. Might be a odd take, but I think he is a fun dart throw. The only problem with Houston is they're probably not going to be scoring a lot. And so can they sustain three receivers? Most likely not. They've still got Brandon Cooks and why am I blanking on his name right now? Thank you. Nico Collins as their two. Those are probably the only two fantasy relevant wide receivers in that offense right now, but Tyler Johnson could be an interesting dart throw again in DFS lineups, or potentially he could be a waiver wire find, especially if Cooks or Collins gets hurt.
Well, and Josh brought it up in the group chat. Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Joel.
I was just going to say, I thought Dameon Pierce was scoring all their points for them this year, but
well, that's true. All the touchdowns.
Maybe they'll throw the ball.
Dameon Pierce. Yeah, they're going to run 6,000 times. No, Josh brought up in the group chat.
Behind.
Yeah, Josh brought up in the group chat. John Mechie was supposed to take over the slot there. Johnson may be able to do that. The team also cut Chris Conley, so there was an effort on the part of Houston to get Tyler Johnson, and they're going to get him on the field because veteran presence wise, other than Brandon Cooks, it was Chris Conley. So for them to send the walking papers, I think the bigger takeaway is Houston is an absolute mess, and our love affair with Dameon Pierce might be a little too early. Like that could be a very bad 0-17 type team this year. So.
Yeah. It would have been really nice if they would have cut Marlon Mack about a week ago, and then we could have talked about it all on the running back show.
There you go.
But, here we are. Well, without any further ado, we're going to get into our actual rankings and move on from some of the news of the week. And we're going to begin with our consensus wide receiver 1 rankings. So looking at our top 12 receivers, just to make sure it's clear, we tend to do these in PPR scoring. So think of these are PPR rankings, and we're looking at our tiers in terms of 12-team leagues. So our wide receiver 1 team will be the top 12. And for our consensus rankings, we have number 1, Justin Jefferson, which is not the popular number 1 of the year, but that's whatever. That's why we're here. Number 2, we have Cooper Kupp, so nobody have a heart attack. Number 3, Devonta Adams. 4, Jamar Chase. 5, Stephon Diggs. 6, Debo Samuel. 7, CeeDee Lamb. 8, Tyreek Hill. Number 9, Mike Evans. 10, DJ Moore. 11, Diontae Johnson. And 12, Michael Pittman. So first off, I once again want to emphasize the use of tiers and the fact that it is way more helpful to think about players in terms of tiers. And so we could sit here and fight about Justin Jefferson versus Cooper Kupp as the wide receiver 1 on the year. But to me, that's not going to be very helpful. If you pick either of those players, you're probably doing pretty well, and you have a really good chance to win your league. And so I want to focus on where either the 4 of us have ranked players really differently, because I think that will provide more insight. And then later on, we'll talk a little bit more about late round players that can provide some value. To that end, I want to start with Debo Samuel, because we have him ranked as our consensus wide receiver 6. Last year, he finished the season as wide receiver 3 with 77 catches, 1,400 receiving yards, 59 carries, 365 rush yards, 14 total touchdowns, 8 were rushing, 6 were receiving. So he finished as wide receiver 3. And Josh, you were the lowest out of all of us on Debo Samuel. You have Debo ranked at wide receiver 14. What's going on, man? Like, what does he have to do to be a wide receiver 1 in your brain?
Well, we'll start with all those rushing stats, right? So how often do wide receivers run the football 59 times? doesn't happen like
once out of the last 1 year.
Well, and that's fair. Well, now you're going from
Small sample
the
size.
not so mobile Jimmy Garoppolo to the extra mobile Trey Lance. So when you now have Trey Lance as the quarterback, why do you need to run Debo almost 60 times in a season? So there's my first issue, right? So when I did my projections, I took Debo's rushing all the way down to 22 carries. Now, starting with where he was at last year with 59 carries, 365 yards, and 8 rushing touchdowns, that accounted for 84.5 fantasy points. Now, you subtract that from his total in PPR leagues, that alone drops him to wide receiver 12. So on the basis of just receiving, he was a fringe wide receiver 1. He was still a wide receiver 1, but he was a fringe wide receiver 1. Now you bring in a quarterback who, Austin, you have stated on numerous occasions, has started only 3 games over the last 3 years. Okay. And now all of a sudden we expect him to replicate and or do better than what Jimmy Garoppolo did as a passer. That I'm not buying into. So that tells me that the targets are coming down. Potentially the yards per reception are coming down. I mean, let's be real here. He spiked last year at over 18 yards per catch. His high was his rookie year at 14.1. When I did my projections, I statted him out at 14.1. So even if you gave him 15 yards per reception, which I think is still pretty generous, and that's something that he could very easily do, he still doesn't top 1,100 yards for me. And again, we're going back to a quarterback that has only started 3 games in the last 3 years. I don't see him throwing for more than 25 touchdowns. So when you have a guy like Brandon Ayuk next to him, who averaged over roughly 12.7 fantasy points per game the last half of the season, which, by the way, was better than what Debo Samuel did per game in that last part of the season. And you also have George Kittle. This offense runs through these 3 guys. So it basically becomes how many mouths to feed, who gets what. So by nature of that, I feel like Debo is going to regress. Can he still be a wide receiver 1? Sure. I just don't think he's going to be that like top 5 guy that we saw last year.
And to be clear, when you say that Ayuk was better than Debo down the stretch last year, you mean in terms of receiving? If you remove,
correct, yeah. I mean, Ayuk in the final 9 games had averaged 5.9 targets per game, 4.1 receptions per game, which was 16.1 yards per reception, 66.2 yards, and 0.33 touchdowns. All of those numbers outside of yards per reception were better per game in the last 9 games of the season than Debo Samuel.
Okay, so lucky for you, Josh, I did my research on Debo Samuel weeks ago for a Mock It Like It's Hot episode and never brought it out. Oh. So now I'm going to come back and counterpoint. And I'm curious what you think about the fact that in weeks 1 through 9 last year, Debo Samuel only had 6 carries. So this was before he really took on that role as a running threat. And he was still wide receiver 4 during those 9 weeks. Is part of your calculation here that you feel that strongly about the connection being a bit different between he and Trey Lance, that receiving trajectory will not remain the same?
No, I think Brandon Ayuk earned more of a role in this offense because that's what we're comparing here, right? Debo was that at the start of the season. Where was Brandon Ayuk? He was way down here. He was in the doghouse. He worked his way out of the doghouse. He became a better wide receiver as the year went on. He has started this year on good terms. He's not in the doghouse. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't have a job at this point. So why all of a sudden, like, this is a guy going into his 3rd year. He was a first-round pick. Debo already got paid, which is great. So now defenses have no excuses but to focus on Debo. So all Ayuk has to do is make his move and say, yo, Trey, I'm open, homie. Hit me. I'm gone. Because just like Debo, he's also very good after the catch.
Couldn't it just as easily explained the other way around, that they needed help at running back? They used Debo, and because Debo wasn't a wide receiver, Ayuk was used. Just saying, it could easily be the other way. I went and looked at the 3 games where Lance threw significant amount of passes, weeks 4, 5, and 17. Debo scored 68 fantasy points and 1 rushing touchdown in a sample size where Lance was in there, and it wasn't even heavily rushing. So I think Debo could still easily be the number 1. I think we want it to be Ayuk, just because.
Oh, no, I still have him as the number 1 guy. I'm not saying I don't.
Yeah. Well, no, and I'm not saying you did
the target share.
Yeah, I mean, I'm saying a significant number 1, and I don't know. Like, if you look at the splits, he was putting up the same fantasy numbers as a receiver or a running back. So I'm not overly concerned. I'm more concerned about the Trey Lance aspect of the offense. That's the larger concern for me in general. But I think Debo gets his. I think Debo established himself as an alpha. It's okay that Ayuk improved. I still think Debo gets his without much issue this year.
And if you're worried about Lance as a passer, I mean, Debo is the low ADOT guy, and Ayuk is more of the deep threat. So, I mean, that's it. If you're questioning Lance's passing ability, I think Ayuk is the one who suffers more than Debo does. Debo gets a lot of slants, ins, manufactured kind of stuff. So I don't think that affects him at all.
The reason I disagree with that, I feel like wide receivers that get down the field better, when you have quarterbacks like Trey Lance that have the running ability, they're not looking to dump off in those low ADOT type roles. They're looking to go down the field. That's why I think it benefits Ayuk more in that sense.
Yeah, but this is still a Kyle Shanahan. It's going to be a very highly structured offense. This isn't.
No, I agree.
So Debo's going to get his. He's going to get his touches. They paid him too much not to.
Yeah, that is true. And speaking of his contract, I want to end talking about Debo by emphasizing the fact that Debo is not going to be running as much this year. And that was actually structured into his contract. He has some language in his contract that he gets kind of a bonus as he has more rush attempts throughout the year. So they basically created an incentive for the 49ers to not run him to the ground.
Did you look up the details, Austin? I don't remember them anymore. I remember when I looked at them, I felt like it was a lot of rushing work for not a lot of money. So it's like, I didn't really understand it being in there at all, because I think it was like, I may be wrong here, and I'm saying not a lot of money, but I swear it's like $750,000 if he hits 350 rushing yards, and another $750 if he hits, like, I think it's like 10 rushing touchdowns. Like, it's something he's not going to do for $1.5 million, which just seemed very strange to me.
Yeah, but I mean, if you think about the trajectory that he was headed on last year,
that's true.
I mean,
okay, that's fair. I'm only thinking of the 8-game sample size.
Yeah, and let me see if I can get my note back up really quickly on this point. Apparently, I can't. Well, point being, he was on a trajectory. Here we go. So in weeks 10 through 17, so that's 6 or 7 games, depending on when their bye week fell, and I cannot remember when that was. He had almost 300 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns rushing in that time. And he had 8 rushing touchdowns last year. He scored more rushing touchdowns last year than receiving touchdowns. So for how they utilized Samuel last year, I think that's actually reasonable. It's just strange because it's not what we typically see as a wide receiver.
It's $650,000 if he hits 380. He only hit 365 last year. And then it's only another 150 if he hits 3 rushing touchdowns. And for someone who like hates the role, I don't know. It just seemed very weirdly incentivized to me. Like, we're talking 900
that's fair.
G's. So, weird.
Yeah, he could easily hit it.
For what it's worth, I have him with 4 rushing touchdowns.
There you go. Get him that 150, Josh.
Get him that bread.
I'm on your side, Debo. I'm trying to make you money, homie.
I have him at 2. I'm in his pocket.
Okay, so next, I want to pivot to another receiver who I thought was interesting because I've been pretty high on this receiver, but then I looked at his ranking from last year and I was like, oh, wait a minute. Am I too high on him? But we're all kind of in on him for the most part. And it's DJ Moore. So he finished as the wide receiver 18 last year. He caught 93 passes, just over 1,150 yards. He only scored 4 touchdowns, which has been the chronic problem with DJ Moore. He doesn't score a lot of touchdowns. Yeah, we have him in our consensus with wide receiver 1 this year. He's a top 12 receiver by our consensus, even though he finished outside the top 12 last year. Ryan, you're the highest on him at wide receiver 9. So what has you believing in DJ Moore as a wide receiver 1 this year?
And what's hilarious is every single time I look at my rankings, I go too high on DJ Moore. And then I go look at my projections and they feel fair. And so I'm okay with it. So I don't have a ton of explanation except for 4 touchdowns is low. So I projected him back up to 6 touchdowns. And if he had scored 6 touchdowns last year, he would have been the wide receiver 12 last year. So I have him at 6 touchdowns. And I also upped his yards per catch a little bit with Baker Mayfield there. I think Sam Darnold has been a scared quarterback since the seeing ghost comment. And I think Baker Mayfield is going to be willing to try some crazy shit that is going to open DJ Moore up in this offense. It's going to be good for Robbie Anderson. It's clearly not going to be good for Terrace Marshall or Laviska Shenault, but it's going to be good for Robbie Anderson. It's going to be good for DJ Moore. So I have him with a little bit, same amount of receptions, actually. I had him at 94. I think he was at 93 last year. But I upped his yardage a little bit. I gave him an extra 100 yards, an extra 2 touchdowns, and that's enough to bring him into the top 10 in my projections. It does feel high, being perfectly honest. And it's all about, this is where a lot of this comes into. This is rankings versus where I would draft them. I'm not drafting DJ Moore as a top 10 wide receiver. I'm not particularly happy. Actually, I was going to say I'm not particularly happy if he's my wide receiver 1. I am. If I start a draft running back, or the way I tend to start drafts, Travis Kelce, running back. If I get DJ Moore as my wide receiver 1 in that setup, I'm pretty okay with it. It's not going to bother me much. I'm going to definitely take wide receiver again in the 5th round because I'm going to feel like I need a little bit more strength at the wide receiver 2 role. But all in all, he is a very safe option. I think he is high floor, low ceiling. I don't know that he's going to win me any weeks, but I don't feel like he's going to lose me a week either.
I love it. So we're going to turn now to Joel to Joel has him actually in the same range around the wide receiver 10 slot. So Joel, you also think he's a wide receiver 1 this year?
Yeah, I think we're all high on him because we obviously all read my article on him back in a couple months ago. Shameless plug. I think Ryan touched on it. The offense is going to be so much better with Baker Mayfield instead of Sam Darnold. And it's not just, he's got a better quarterback throwing him the ball. He's got a better quarterback running the offense. I mean, if you watch some of those games with Sam Darnold last year, it was just literally pathetic trying to watch him throw. I mean, so whatever you think about Baker Mayfield, he's basically a league average quarterback. But that is a massive jump from a team that's been going with guys like Kyle Allen and the corpse of Cam Newton and Sam Darnold the last couple of years. So, the opportunity is much better this year than it has been. So, he's probably never going to be a huge double-digit touchdown guy, but he's going to have the opportunity to probably double, the 4 touchdowns a year he's gotten, just because the offense is going to be so much better.
Yeah, and I believe in touchdown regression and think that he should score more touchdowns this year. 4 touchdowns is embarrassingly low, and I don't believe that repeats for another year. This would have been the point of the show if our friend Steve Vossen were here, where I would have transitioned by saying, Steve, you have him at wide receiver 27. But we don't get to know what he thinks about him because Steve is on vacation. And
he did just post his projections today. I agree. Take your time off, but I wanted to go in and look and see if we could at least see where he had him with yards, if I can be quick about it here. So.
Yeah, if you can be quick about that, it would be great. Otherwise, talk to Steve about it. He loves interacting with folks.
So interestingly enough, he has him essentially at last year's stat line with 2 more touchdowns. So this is an instance where it's not that Steve hates DJ Moore. He has him at 90 receptions, 1,100 yards, and 6 touchdowns. He just really likes everybody else. Lots of touchdowns being scored. Steve has Justin Jefferson and Devonta Adams dropping 16 touchdowns this year. So with those high touchdown numbers for everybody else, 6, while it's good for DJ Moore, it's bad for Steve's rankings. So I'm certainly not speaking for Steve there, but it's the lack of touchdowns that seems to be hurting DJ Moore. So
there it is. Well, we'll agree to disagree on that.
If I get 90, 1,106 out of wide receiver 27, I'm good with that.
Hey, that might be Brandon Nyuk.
I say, Josh, he moved up your rankings today, didn't he?
Yeah, so when I was going through and doing my edits, obviously I moved Shenault from the Jags to the Panthers, and just kind of taking in some of these reports, like, obviously they're not happy with Terrace Marshall. Robbie Anderson being on the trade block and all these other things. Like, I mean, I wasn't super high on any of those guys anyway. Like when I was doing these projections, it was literally McCaffrey and DJ Moore. Like that was it. Like these are the people that are driving this entire offense. DJ Moore's always been a big play guy. And I mean, over half of his career touchdowns, which aren't many, but over half of them are over 50 yards. Like this is just who he is. So, it's easy to bake in a 15 plus yards per reception metric, or even 14 plus. But when he's literally the biggest threat in the offense, why is he not seeing 160 plus targets? You know what I mean? Like to me, it just makes so much more sense, especially when you have a better quality quarterback behind center now in Baker Mayfield. I understand Baker's somebody that likes to spread the football around, but when you have somebody like DJ Moore that can actually get open, I don't think you need to, spread the ball around as much as possible. And Moore's not going to be one of these like diva type OBJ type receivers that's like, I need the football, you need to throw it to me, and you need to focus only on me. Like DJ Moore's never really been that kind of guy. So, and that's really where that came from. When I started tweaking, I think I may have given him like 5 extra targets, and that jumped him from my wide receiver 10 to wide receiver 8.
I love it. Well, we're going to transition to our next question. And on the way, we are going to answer a listener question, which we answered in the chat, but I want to have us discuss it too as well. So this is a trade proposal from that we got from Brooks7070 saying, I'll trade away Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen and in return get Tyreek Hill and Tom Brady. The other player has Austin Eckler and Mike Williams, so I don't really understand why the other person wants this trade, because
maybe they're a big Chargers fan. Okay,
well, maybe so, but
I answered in the chat.
Suck, but
Yeah, as I say, I answered in the chat, so I'll just quickly say, for me, I said keep the Charger side of things. Justin Herbert is my QB2. I prefer him over Brady this year. And then I do Tyreek Hill scoring more points than Keenan Allen to focus on the wide receiver part. But Keenan Allen is the more steady wide receiver. He is going to give you a consistent floor every week, which you are certainly not going to get with Tyreek Hill. You did not get a consistent floor with Patrick Mahomes. You are not getting a consistent floor with Tua Tagovailoa. So I personally would hang on to the Chargers side of this. I actually have that combination, Herbert and Allen, in many a league this year.
I agree. I would say also, especially if this is a redraft league, which I'm assuming it is, probably took a 5th, 4th round pick on Justin Herbert, and Tom Brady was like a 10th round pick. So just from like the draft position standpoint, you're losing value from that perspective. I agree with Ryan. I would keep the Chargers side of this trade. Does anybody disagree with Ryan and myself? I want to offer a counterpoint for Tyreek Hill and Tom Brady.
Oh, Josh. Kick him out of the show.
Is this like one of those things where it's like, it's not fun if we all agree, and so I'm going to pretend.
Well, there's always that aspect.
I was just going to say, anybody who's watched this show before knows that Josh hates when we all agree on everything. So.
Well, I look at it this way, all right? As much as I love Justin Herbert, why are we again, you can look at it from a draft value perspective all you want. Brady has always been a value in drafts for the last 5-6 years. He's just that freaking good. And Father Time has not caught up with this dude. He had more passing touchdowns. I think he was second behind Herbert in passing yards. Maybe it was flipped, but how's that going to change? If we get 11 games out of Julio Jones, the dude's going to throw for 5,400 yards. There's no slowing down for Tom Brady until he literally says, I'm done, because Father Time is just saying you get a hall pass, dude. I'm not buying it. And you cannot sit here and tell me that you would take Keenan Allen over Tyreek Hill.
100%.
Okay. So the gap between those two wide receivers is so much more significant than it is between Herbert.
You misunderstand me. I 100% would take Keenan Allen over Tyreek Hill. Even if you're not weighing in the draft value. First of all, the gap between those two receivers in my projections is 5 fantasy points. But the difference between those 5 fantasy points is Tyreek Hill is going to go 40 and 10. Keenan Allen is going to go 25 and 25. I would rather have the guy where I know I can plug him in. He's not going to miss. Keenan Allen all the way for me.
I have Tyreek Hill scoring 45 more fantasy points than Keenan Allen.
You're wrong.
To me, there's just no upside to Keenan Allen at all. None. Like, I love him as a player. I think he's great. He's the classic old reliable. He's entering his Larry Fitzgerald years. He's just going to keep right on coasting. But where you are drafting him, there is literally no upside. Tyreek Hill has the upside to be the overall wide receiver 1. You do not get that with Keenan Allen.
That's fair. He also has the downside of putting up multiple weeks below 10 points. So that's just a difference on how you're going to build your fantasy team.
Yeah, and I think this is actually a really good point when it comes to drafting receivers is there are receivers, traditionally your Tyler Lockett's, who are going to pop off for 40, 50 points some weeks. And then, I mean, hell, Tyler Lockett will have like a 4-point week. And you're like, what the heck happened? Did you like trip over something and missed half the game? It's like, no, he started the whole time. And then there are other receivers like Keenan Allen that are going to be steady. You're going to be able to rely on them. And it's kind of, I think it's a preference. Do you prefer to try and aim for the upside or do you prefer the floor? For me, I tend to prefer the floor. Seems like Josh is leaning more like he wants the upside of a Tyreek Hill. And you kind of have to make that call when you're in your draft. So I'm going to pivot to this next question, and I'm kind of calling a little bit of an audible on the original show flow just to give my co-hosts a heads up. I'm going to skip ahead to this question where we're going to talk about wide receivers on the same team. And this is an interesting conversation because there are a lot of teams with really stacked receiver rooms.
That came up on the draft show this week.
It did, and it was such a great topic. I thought we need to talk about it here, and I like it. Did a little bit of research in between then and now so I could pull some stats on how frequently we see two receivers from the same team ending in the top 12. So the classic example of this is in many people's rankings, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins right now are both prospective wide receiver ones in a lot of people's rankings. Now, T. Higgins tends to fluctuate depending on who you follow. But there's several people who have them both as wide receiver 1 candidates for the year. So I want to talk about how often does that happen? And also, when do you look at a team and say, oh yeah, both of these receivers, they could be a wide receiver 1 in a year versus when you aren't taking that strategy. So first, I want to just note some stats. So since 1999, only 29 times have two receivers on the same team finished in the top 12. So that's averages just a little bit over once a year. So you can say, okay, if you pick the right team, you can get two top 12 receivers in a given year. What I will note is since 2014, it's been kind of an on-off pattern where 2014, there were two teams that had two top 12 receivers, and then there were none in 2015. And then it happened again in 2016, 2018, 2020. Last year, there were no teams with two top 12 receivers. So maybe that means that this year there's going to be two receivers. Just like,
exactly.
Taking that out. But the point being that some of this data is skewed
and Mike Williams were both top 12 last year.
Depending on format.
My data. Depending on format. Yeah, I think in PPR.
Are you going overall points or just points per game?
Overall points.
According to fantasy data on
they were 11 and 12.
Yeah, 11 and 12.
Well,
yeah.
I need to fix my app. So then it happened again last year.
There you go. Now we're not due.
So now we're not due. Thanks, Josh. Take away the fun. Okay, so maybe it's happened.
Got to give the people what they deserve. So.
And since 2010, it's only happened 14 times that that's happened. So we average about one team a year. So because of that, I want to talk about a few teams. I'm just going to throw out some teams basically that have two receivers that people either think could be wide receiver ones or it's kind of like debatable on whether they can have two wide receiver ones. And I'm going to go kind of around the horn and just ask people like, what are your thoughts on, are you drafting two players from the same team? And of some of these teams, like who would you pick over others? So some teams that I'm thinking about when I think about this conversation are Miami with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, Buffalo, Stephon Diggs, and Gabe Davis. That's been one thrown out there as the high upside. We might talk about that later. Denver with Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, the Rams with Cooper Kupp and Allen Robinson. The Chargers, like Josh just said, Allen and Williams. Tampa Bay, you got Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. And Cincinnati, like I mentioned, you have Higgins and Chase. So I'm going to start with Ryan. How are you thinking about drafting 2 receivers from the same team? And are there certain teams you think have the potential to have 2 number 1 receivers for fantasy and others that you were just straight up avoiding for that type of strategy?
So do I think it's possible? Absolutely. I shared this story on the mock draft show. I'm going to quickly share it here. I am someone who shies away from it, even when every fiber of my being is telling me to be a part of it. A few years ago, I kept Mike Williams. This was the last year Jameis Winston was in Tampa Bay, Mike Evans. And Chris Godwin just kept falling in the draft. And at one point, I literally said out loud, I should draft Chris Godwin. But I didn't. And I let my little brother have him. And that was the year that through week 13, they were the number 1 and 2 fantasy wide receivers. And so it's certainly possible. And everything I know says to do it. And I do have Keenan Allen and Mike Williams on a few dynasty teams. But staring down the barrel in a redraft, I will flat out avoid it. It's just, it doesn't feel right to me, plain and simple. Usually I'm not the guy who is going to pay up for the wide receiver 1 in an offense. I'm usually going running back in that stance. So I love getting the wide receiver 2. I don't remember if you mentioned them, but did you mention the Raiders as a team you were looking at? Because last year, Devonta Adams and Hunter Renfrow were 2 top 10 wide receivers. Devonta Adams didn't play for that team last year, but it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But I absolutely think it could happen. And I think 2 of the teams to look at are the Bengals and the Chargers again. The Chargers, as we've gathered here, one of my favorite offenses. I'm a big Justin Herbert guy. Mike Williams, it's interesting because he had 2 different things going for him last year. And Josh, I credit you every time we talk about Mike Williams. Mike Williams had the contract year. Players want to get paid on the contract year, but he also had the first year as the X in this new system, which tends to do well in that role. And he absolutely ate in that role. So I don't know that we're going to see the downfall of Mike Williams that everyone else seems to think we are. And then the T Higgins, Jamar Chase thing, just like Josh brought up with Ayuk kind of outplaying Debo Samuel towards the end of the season. It's often overlooked. T Higgins outplayed Jamar Chase towards the end of the year, but Jamar Chase had that 3 touchdown week, whereas Higgins only had a 2 touchdown week. So we all remember the enormous Jamar Chase week, but we don't remember T Higgins the week before or the week after. I don't remember which one came first. T Higgins ate as well. So those 2, I think it's very, very easy. They could end up with 2 wide receivers in the top 12 this year, just because I adore those offenses. And then if he were healthy, we'd have to keep an eye on Tampa Bay. Tom Brady is not going anywhere. I adore Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin is a very good wide receiver. He just needs to keep his ass on the field. So it's a little terrifying there. So I won't be surprised if points per game wise, Tampa Bay is up there. But for me, if I'm betting on it happening, I'm betting Chargers and I'm betting Bengals.
I love it. We're going to go to Joel next. And again, same question to you. Is this a strategy you will employ 2 receivers from the same team on your roster in redraft? And then particularly if there are teams that Ryan did not touch on, you think their receivers have that kind of upside, I'm happy to hear about those. Or if you just disagree with Ryan.
No, I agree. I'm not generally not drafting 2 receivers from the same team, especially, higher up ones. I may take a flyer or something like that. But it's just limiting your weekly upside. And we touched on this last week, that fantasy football is a weekly game. It's the week. The week is all that matters. And if you got 2 guys from the same team, you're limiting your upside. So because they're both not going to go off. They're both not going to have massive games on the same week. It's just, how often is that going to happen? Once or twice a year? You can't count on that. But when I'm looking at, who could be 2 top 10s, you got to look at the narrow target trees, right? So you talk about the Chargers. They've got Mike Williams. They got Keenan Allen. Do you believe in Josh Palmer? Do you believe in Gerald Everett getting targets there? How many targets is Austin Eckler going to get? I like Miami a lot, just because I think Waddle and Tyreek are going to dominate targets there. I don't believe in Mike Gesicki. I don't really like either of those running backs in the pass game. I mean, Chase Edmonds has done a little bit, but he's not a specialist by any means. I think those 2 are going to. If there's a situation where you're going to have 2 top 10 receivers or top 12 receivers on the same team, I think it's Miami.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to echo and kind of follow up on something that you mentioned about what types of teams you would look for this type of strategy. And you mentioned the narrow target tree as one thing you would look at. Offenses where like these 2 or 3 players are going to be the guys getting the pass catching work. I think another thing to look for is what type of quarterback do these teams have, right? For all of the teams that we're talking about, your Los Angeles Chargers, Tampa Bay, and Miami, those quarterbacks, Tom Brady, Justin Herbert, we talked about Cincinnati, so Joe Burrow and Tua Tagovailoa. These are guys that they don't run a lot. They don't add a ton with their legs. And so they're not going to vulture touchdowns from your receivers. They're going to be passing the ball a lot. Whereas I think most people would agree that Buffalo is a tough offense to see having 2 top 10 receivers because sure, Gabe Davis may have some weeks as a wide receiver 1, but Josh Allen is probably going to have 5 to 8 rushing touchdowns throughout the course of the season. And that's going to take away opportunities for a second receiver like that to come in and overtake, and also just takes away some of the pass volume for some of these receivers. Josh, I'm going to come to you last. Do you have anything you want to add on this? Any teams you want to highlight as potential?
You guys kind of hit them all. I mean, we know the upside obviously with Hill and Waddle in Miami, and to Joel's point, that is going to be a system where those 2 guys are funneled the most targets, because if Mike Gesicki can't play in line, he's not going to see targets. It's just not going to happen. That's not how this system is built. I love the Bengals, but again, when you talk about funneling targets, you have a third option there in Tyler Boyd. So, but I know everybody's on this T. Higgins, wide receiver 1 bandwagon. And I trust me, I believe he has that upside. We know he has that touchdown potential, but in 2 years, he scored less touchdowns than Jamar Chase did all of last year. So he needs to be able to get into the end zone. And when they get close, they give it to Joe Mixon. So unless Joe Mixon gets hurt, I don't see this big touchdown explosion for someone like T. Higgins, which is ultimately going to limit that, top 10 type ceiling. If Trey Lance is like this like superstar quarterback that, people seem to think he is, we could definitely see it with Debo and Ayuk. Obviously, the Chargers with Allen and Mike Williams. We know Mike Williams is a big touchdown guy. Keenan Allen, I don't think has ever scored more than 8 in a season, and I think he's only done that once. So you're really only looking at about 6 touchdowns with him. Your hope is that he gets 100+ receptions, which obviously he's more than capable of doing. I mean, again, you guys kind of hit it all. I'm not opposed. I won't draft 2 high-end wide receivers from the same team. I will say I have 0 issue later in the season trading for one if their bye weeks are already over. And yes, I know for a fact that they are it. You know what I mean? Like if we're talking like Isaac Bruce, Torrey Holt, Reggie Wayne, Marvin Harrison, give me all of that. Like I want it.
I have a question for you guys though, because we've talked a lot about San Francisco, probably too much in this show. But I'm a scheme guy, and I pay attention to play calling and things like that. And we don't know Mike McDaniel, but I expect a little bit of San Francisco in his game. Josh, you brought up if Trey Lance is a great thrower of the football, they could have 2 top 10 wide receivers. They threw the ball, if I just quickly looked, I believe 3rd least in the NFL last year, maybe 4th least in the NFL. And now we may see Miami with that exact same system. Or are we just saying for San Francisco, it's going to be harder for me to believe because it's a new mobile quarterback. I don't see a huge uptick in passing attempts there. For Miami, you could convince me that Mike McDaniel is not going to do anything because Mike McDaniel didn't call the plays in San Francisco last year. So we don't know who he is. But I guess, Joel, when you look at like Miami and San Francisco, do you think it's going to be a similar offense or are you thinking it's something completely different in Miami?
I think it'll be similar, but McDaniel was the passing game coordinator in San Francisco. So he's not necessarily tethered to Kyle Shanahan. So I think they're going to give him more. I think the way you've got the connection with Tua and Jalen Waddle going back to college, you've got the money they spent on Tyreek. And, like we alluded to before, there's really no other targets there. There's really no consistent running game that we know of. We don't have the history of, the way Kyle Shanahan has run an offense. And so I think it's going to be a bit different than people expect.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at that Miami backfield, find me somebody that's going to carry the ball 200 plus times.
Raheem Mostert, 1 week.
Like, we know it's not happening. That's the point I'm getting at. Chase Edmonds isn't built that way. Mostert, 29 years old, oft injured. Like, I kind of redid the projections after they released Sony Michel, and I don't think I have any of those guys over 150 rushing attempts. Like, it's just not going to be there. But Edmonds is very good running in this style of scheme, but I feel like they're going to use him more situationally and a complement as long as Mostert is healthy. Once Mostert goes down, we're looking at, again, Myles Gaskin going into this role, and he's just not a yards per carry guy. Like, he's just going to fall forward and get 3 yards, maybe 4 if he's lucky. And they're going to rely on Waddle. They're going to rely on Hill. And they're going to rely on whoever ultimately comes out of the slot, whether that's Cedric Wilson or Trent Sherfield.
Austin, I just want to ask you same sort of question, just for my own projections. I have the Dolphins throwing the ball just over 600 times this year. I have San Francisco down at 523. They threw it 514 last year. So I barely have San Francisco throwing it more. I know you've kind of dug into San Francisco. Am I over projecting the Dolphins? Am I under projecting San Francisco? What do you think?
I mean, I think that all feels right to me. One of the things about Miami last year is they were one of the highest volume offenses in general. They ran a lot of plays throughout the season. They tended to have a more up-tempo style of play, so I can see them passing the ball a lot more. And I do think San Francisco is still going to be a run-first offense. They're probably going to have a lot of RPO-style plays in there, giving Trey Lance the opportunity to use his legs. I think the thing with San Francisco that'll still benefit their receivers is there's not a lot of receivers who are going to be catching passes. So I don't think that is a knock on any of the receiver room in there, but I think having them at a lower passing rate, I don't think having Trey Lance in the room is going to have Kyle Shanahan be like, oh yeah, let's throw the ball more, especially as a rookie. Again,
we better throw a lot more.
He's played 3 full games since 2019. He's a rookie, y'all. Like, I am very hopeful for his upside, but Shanahan knows that he needs Lance to succeed, and so he's going to play to his strengths and give him minimal opportunities to make mistakes early on.
For what it's worth, I have Miami at 540 pass attempts, and I have San Francisco at 517.
Interesting. I might be way over on Miami. Take a look. Anyway.
Anyways.
I mean, I went naturally lower on San Francisco. Anytime you have a quarterback that is going to use their legs as much as Trey Lance does, they rarely throw the ball 550 times. It's just not going to happen.
Right. So I'm going to get to another listener question, and then we're going to do one last quick question, if we can squeeze it in before we wrap up our show. This question comes from Elixirs.
Our boy
has 4 wide receiver / flex spots, which I assume is 4 total, since they gave us 5 players plus a Miles Sanders. Assuming no injuries, Waddle, DJ Moore, Elijah Moore, Brandon Nyuk, KJ Osborne, could also throw in Miles Sanders. No, don't do it. I would rather take the dart throw on KJ Osborne at that point. I'll go first. Mine, I think those first 4, Waddle, both of the Moores, and Ayuk, that's who I have here. Osborne, I think we need to see it. We need to see how much Minnesota's going to play 3 receiver sets and how much he's going to get targeted in that offense before I feel confident starting him. But I think those other 4, we've seen it. We know what it looks like, and I feel really confident about those 4. Anybody have other thoughts than that?
No. Miles Sanders told us not to play him. I listened.
And Philadelphia just added another running back today, right?
Right.
They're like, oh yeah, Trey Sermon. We need another big body guy to give us.
For what it's worth, Sanders did practice today for the first time in like a month, so there's that.
Well,
he had to keep. Oh, okay. I was gonna say this question seemed way too easy. Now I understand.
I thought so too.
I'm like,
okay. So also Mike Thomas. Okay. this doesn't change anything for me because I want to see Mike Thomas actually take a football snap before I put him in a lineup. But anyone else disagree?
I'd probably throw Thomas out in over Osborne. Osborne is still relatively unproven as well, so I would go with Thomas.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love KJ Osborne probably more than most people. But he's still just an upside play. Like, they're going to run a lot more 3 receiver sets, and that's great. He scored a lot of his touchdowns playing in that Adam Thielen role. So as long as Adam Thielen's on the field, he's not going to see near as many touchdowns, which that ultimately is going to cap a lot of that upside. When you throw Michael Thomas into this mix, I mean, DJ Moore is going to be a high target guy. Elijah Moore, I think, is probably going to be the guy, at least for the start of the season. We'll see how quickly they work Garrett Wilson into that role. You're going to have some weeks where Ayuk probably isn't playable. Like that's just the nature of the San Francisco offense. Like, it's usually one of those 3 guys that ultimately pops. So I think Ayuk will probably be the odd man out most of those weeks. In which case you can, sub in Michael Thomas. I still think as long as he is healthy, he's going to be a 130 target receiver.
I love it. We just got one more question, and I want to prioritize it over our last topic. 12-team PPR pick between Mixon, Kamara. Pick 10. So pick 10 in their draft. Yeah. Choosing between Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara, or DeAndre Swift.
They're in the right order for me. That's how I would take them.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. I can make an argument for Kamara before Mixon.
Ooh, I was going to say the other way around and put Mixon last. Kamara last because of the...
I'm with Austin. I've got Kamara as my RB5. So,
yeah.
No suspension. Give me all the Alvin.
All right, Joel. Break the tie, buddy.
I would take Swift ahead of all of them, so he's going to get no help in this.
And that's what happens when you ask 4 fantasy people for their pick.
Hey, 2 votes for Kamara, so suck it.
Okay, I'm gonna try and give some actual advice on this one. So one concern that could knock Kamara is Trevor Penning just went on IR, so they have offensive line injuries that could harm the run game early in the season. But Kamara
makes his money on catching
season.
Passes.
That's also true.
That's how he's always done it.
But he's catching passes from Jameis Winston, theoretically.
Okay, whoa. There's no reason to start throwing Winston in the mud right now. Come on. We got 3 minutes left, and you're going to start throwing out takes like that?
I would say he doesn't check down. He's not a check down guy.
Okay, that's actually a great point and a good thing to consider. Joe Mixon,
not, but
like
he is
mentioned,
the biggest piece of that offense.
That is also true. So we can debate this for a long time. And
I was just going to say, this is such... I mean, there's a reason you're asking this question.
Yeah.
It's rough.
Let's go here. Pick your favorite. Like, genuinely gut call, because I don't think you're going to go wrong with either 3 of those.
That's a very fair point. There's no wrong answer here. Actually, I'll give you this. I assume it's a 12-team league because you didn't say you have back-to-back picks. So I'm assuming you're going 10 and then what is that? 14, 15. Take the one who definitely won't be there for you at 15.
And that's
hoping that one of the other 2 fall.
One of the other 2 should be back. Yeah.
Yeah.
It just depends on which site you're drafting from. Like the way that the sleeper ADP is, Mixon is a first-round guy. Swift and Kamara are typically on that back end.
Best piece of advice Josh could have possibly given you there. This is something I preach on the mock draft show all the time. Pay attention to the site default rankings because whichever one is lowest is the most likely to be there for you at 15. So take the one that's the highest, hoping that the one that's the lowest falls to you at 15.
Okay, we just have the questions continuing to pour in. So we're going to continue writing with this. Drafting in an hour. I feel that. I think Josh feels that. Are you playing in Josh's league? Because Josh is
Josh.
Picking 8.
No, I don't think that's my roommate. So I think we're okay.
If he's there, am I stupid to pass on Jamar Chase and grab Cook or Mixon? So drafting 8th. If Chase is still there, are you taking Jamar Chase?
I'm not going to call him stupid, but as a 0 RB guy, I'm definitely taking Chase.
Yeah, okay, so Joel's biased in this.
Yeah, I would. It's interesting because I have Cook and Mixon right next to each other in my rankings. I would feel better about Cook than Mixon. I also would probably take Chase. I just looked at my projections, and we're all making shit up when it comes to projections, but I literally have them at 309, 305, 304. So they're all going to score the same amount of points this year in my projections. For me, I like running. I'm the opposite of Joel. I would prefer running back. So I would probably go Cook, but I have no issue with Chase. I've literally done like 4 underdog drafts this week and have gotten 8th or 9th every single time and have been choosing between Cook and Chase and have went to Cook to Chase. So
you can kind of, I would say you can look at it this way. If you end up going Chase in the first at pick 8, I don't know if it's a 10 team or a 12 team, then you're thinking, all right, well, I have to absolutely grab a running back with that next pick, right? So who's that running back likely? Joel, I know this is not geared towards you, okay? It's not geared towards you.
10 team.
Again, if you're considering one of these running backs here, that's the point I'm getting at. Like, all right, so it's a 10 team. So within 5 more picks, you have a shot at another running back. So if Cook and Mixon are still there and you decide to go Chase, you could potentially be looking at Kamara, Swift, Javonte Williams, Mixon again, potentially, maybe. I mean, I've gotten a couple drafts where Najee started to fall because of the foot injury.
Yeah, Najee is plummeting. I'm plummeting.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there's still a lot of – you could get Saquon there as well. So then you have to weigh the difference of if you go the running back first, which wide receiver could potentially be there. Chase may not make it, but would you be okay settling for a Devonta Adams or a Stephon Diggs to pair with Mixon or Cook versus Chase and, Barkley, Kamara, Aaron Jones, DeAndre Swift, etc. Like,
yeah, it helps.
For me, I have Chase scoring exponentially more points than all these guys. I would go Chase in this instance. That's just my opinion. But that's kind of the strategy, really, Bruza, that you would be looking at here in the event that you decide you want to go Chase over the running backs.
Yeah, and I think it really speaks to us as analysts because, Josh, you've been hitting the home run guy lately. Chase, Tyreek Hill, where I'm like, nope, Keenan Allen, Dalvin Cook, keep it sweet and safe for me. So,
yeah, I think to me it also depends a little bit on your league settings because in a PPR league, I am much more willing to go Chase at the 8th pick and grab a running back after it comes around the turn. But if let's say it's non-PPR, I'm taking Cook almost certainly. And if it's half PPR, I might even be taking Cook or Mixon there, especially because you can get a solid receiver in the second. But I think once again, like, it's who do you like more at this point? Who do you want to pull for? Who do you think has the best season? And you could take that. You could take that gut call. And I'm about trusting your gut when you're playing fantasy football. And if you're trying to like really get a good analytical reason to pick between one of these 3 guys, it's going to be hard to make a great case that way. And so take the guy that you like the most. And yes, we will, whenever this
blame
goes
me.
all
Josh
wrong,
gets the blame on everything. It's okay.
We will blame Josh. Just has faith. We blame Josh.
Although I do like Elixir's comment, but we can blame Joe. He's not here to defend himself.
That's also true. Or Steve. We just like catching strays.
Steve catches enough shit. We don't need to throw strays his way too.
Guys, I'm going to ask this question live. Josh, how much time do you have?
Negative 3 minutes.
I was going to say I could probably stretch it till about 10 after, maybe 15 after.
You know what?
15 after is pushing it. But
let's not stress you out. Let's wrap up the show. Guys, this has been a lot of fun. And I have enjoyed it so much. Really appreciate the opportunity to do this and have really enjoyed y'all coming and hanging out with us on these Thursday night ranking shows. They're all still on YouTube. So if you're like, oh man, that guy, Austin, he's so smart. I want to hear him say some good stuff again. Just run it back on YouTube. You might not be saying that.
It's like Joe hasn't left the show. It's perfect.
Plus, he's on our Monday show, the mock draft.
I'll take that as a compliment. Right now, though, I'm going to turn it over to Josh to tell everyone about our in-season content and whatever else you want to plug.
So first off, I just want to say we wrapped our women fantasy shows yesterday. Our initial goal was to raise $2,500. Our stretch goal was to raise $3,000. Between the raffles and the GoFundMe with the Women of Fantasy Charity League that we set up, we've raised over $3,100. So I cannot thank all of you enough for sharing, donating, watching, contributing, however it was. This means the absolute world to Laura. The Galvanized family was kind of struck with tragedy yesterday. So just being able to give her some good news this morning was really awesome. That being said, Women of Fantasy is not going anywhere. This is something that we do every day, year round. And hello, Faith. I see you in the comments. Joel, as you see, he has our Her Story in the Making shirt on. This is a new show that Women of Fantasy is doing. We are partnering with Fantasy Alarm, one of their employees / friend of Club Fantasy, Britt Flynn. She's going to be hosting, and we're going to be talking to a lot of women throughout the industry that are just getting their career started and starting to build their own pathways. It's going to be a lot of fun getting to know these women as they, continue their march. And some of them will have ties to Galvanize, some of them may not. And that's cool, because at the end of the day, we want to support all women in this endeavor. We also have a couple other things that we're working on with Women of Fantasy. I'm not going to dive too much into it because I want to be able to kind of throw out a nice little surprise next week. But in terms of Club Fantasy, we are going to have some written content on the site every week. Ryan's going to be doing our Pick 'em Up waivers column. Also, I guess we are launching a second. Okay, I'll pull this one up. So as I mentioned, we're doing a Women of Fantasy Charity League, and apparently there's enough interest. We might be doing a second one. So, and maybe a third. Who knows? Best ball tournament style. So I'll probably end up reopening the GoFundMe link. So stay glued to Twitter, women_FF on Twitter. That's where we'll have all the announcements. And obviously, if you follow Club Fantasy on Twitter at Club Fantasy FFL, I will be retweeting and sharing all of that information as well. But back to the Club Fantasy side of things, Ryan's Pick 'em Up waiver wire column. We're going to be doing that on Tuesdays after week 1. Ryan, stream of the week on Wednesdays?
Yep.
Okay. We'll have Joel's Blurred Lines column, which is our sports betting article every week, likely on Thursdays. Our confidence plays, which is our start sit, which typically I used to do. That's going to be taken over by our good buddy, Big Travie from the Fantasy Whisperers. He's going to be doing that on Friday mornings. And then Austin is going to be doing our new DFS cash games article. Our lovely friend Kira, who is still working with us, just not writing with us. She got a much deserved call up to the big leagues. She's now writing over at the 33rd team, which just launched like one of the most incredible research tools over on their site. But Austin's going to be doing the cash games article Saturday mornings. And then we're also going to have Chris Molina doing a prop bet article that last year he did for Thrive Fantasy. This year we're going to be focusing on underdog player props. In terms of shows, so obviously Wednesdays, no pun intended, baby. That's where we're at. Every Wednesday, 7 o'clock. Ryan, myself, Joe will be previewing the weeks. Thursday nights, we now have a new show. It is going to be called You Down with IDP. That's going to be with our good buddy Joe Zolo. And we're partnering with Fantasy and Frames. Jorge and Nate Markham are going to be joining the show. And we'll have a brand new host for the show. If you follow her on Twitter at FQueenRoxanne, she's one of the few women that I've come across in this space that can talk IDP. So we are insanely excited to be partnering with them with Fantasy and Frames and getting Roxanne on the show with us as well. Saturday mornings, Faith will be back hosting Start Sit Different Day, partnering with Joe, and then that's going to be our Start Sit show. Everybody just bring in their questions. We'll be answering them on air. We'll have Club Fantasy team members circling through. We'll have analysts across other sites circling through as well. We just kind of want it to be good, fun time Saturday mornings. We get ready for tailgating and college football and
still the best intro in fantasy football.
Right? I love that video intro. That was fantastic. And then Sunday mornings, you will have DFS and Chill, hosted by Ryan with Kira in the analyst chair. And we'll probably be bringing on a lot of guests with that as well. And then our Monday morning recap show. Monday's Hangxiety with myself, Ryan, and Kira, recapping all of the lovely events, and most of us probably massively dehydrated and hungover and dealing with a case of the Mondays and like, oh my God, am I going to lose my fantasy matchup? So a lot of good content coming your way from Club Fantasy. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We are currently 6 subscribers away from 400 on our YouTube page. When you hit subscribe, take a screenshot, send it to any of us on Twitter. I just want to be able to verify in the event that you have a private YouTube subscription, because when we hit 400, I'm giving away a signed Debo Samuel jersey. And it's not because I have him ranked at wide receiver 14, because I'm giving him away. That's all.
He said he's done with him.
So yes, that's all I got.
12.
Get out of here. Boom. Subscribe, bitches.
I love it.
But anyway, I'll let you guys outro the show. I got to bounce. So
See you, Josh.
See you, Josh. This has been so fun to do for the past several weeks. Appreciate everyone for listening. Hit that subscribe button. Share the show out. Watch this back. Follow us all on Twitter. Once again, I'm Austin Amandolia at Austin_FFL on
2 weeks in a
Instagram
row,
and
bro.
Twitter. I know. I just I like the underscore, I guess. Ryan Weisse at the Fantasy 5, Joel Wirth at the Joel Wirth. Not with us tonight, but also in our consensus rankings were Chris Molina at Chrismo2413 and Steve Vossen at FF by Committee. Remember, defense wins championships. Offense wins fantasy football. Good night, y'all.
Peace.